against Brian Huffman. Josh was our 2nd overall seed with black-white tokens. Brian Huffman was our 7th overall seed on Jund. And we are in the middle of game 2 with Joshua Cho up a game. So it looks like Brian does have a Dark Confidant on the battlefield. He just revealed a Thoughtseize to it. However, Josh Cho with his Spirit Fingers there showing off that he is Hellbent. However, he does have a Bitter Blossom on the battlefield, and that is a very good Magic card.
Yeah, not only that, but the Rest in Peace. The Rest in Peace really hoses the Jund deck. I mean, their Scavenging Oozes are just Grizzly Bears. Their Tarmogoyfs are just O1s. Some of the utility of Kolaghan's Command is lost. Josh is really showing how his deck is just set up to beat these other mid-range decks.
Yeah, he's just been slicing through the field all day, or all weekend long, and it's been great to watch him battle.
Yeah, and here it is. It's so easy for Josh to trade his resources for Brian's, but it's hard for Brian to trade his resources for Josh.
What's actually interesting is that we see here a Bitter Blossom on one side and a Dark Confidant on the other. So both players are losing life and gaining resources, being creatures and cards. But it feels like Josh is in the better spot.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's part of that is just the fact that Josh's creatures fly, and Josh's guaranteed attackers that can go through, whereas Brian can get blocked. And so that really sets Josh ahead in this situation where, other than the fact that he has flying creatures, they're kind of at parity.
Ooh, and it looks like we've got a Lingering Souls as the draw for Joshua Cho. He's not able to flash it back, but 2/1/1s up front is going to be just good enough. So Brian Huffman does reveal a Wooded Foothills to his Dark Confidant. It looks like he does have at least one Lightning Bolt in his hand. If he happens to have another, this could just be game next turn, as Joshua Cho is going to go down to 6 in his upkeep from that Bitter Blossom trigger.
Yeah, this is a very close game. Despite Josh being a little bit of ahead and having a trajectory that puts him even farther ahead, it's still, you know, a very close game, and with a Lightning Bolt or some other burn spell, Brian could steal it.
So Josh is going to set some attackers here, and it looks like he's going to go down to 5.
Which is a lot different than 4. 4 would be the magic number that he wants to avoid.
Now on his turn, he's going to be able to attack Brian for 3 and put him at 3, and I guess he's just going to hope that that Dark Confidant's going to kill him. So it looks like we've got a Tarmogoyf from Brian, and he's just going to pass the turn.
The saddest Tarmogoyf in the world. It's a 0/1 because of that Rest in Peace.
So Josh is going to go down to 4. Now there's a chance that he just dies next turn.
Yeah, if he doesn't kill Brian this turn and Brian doesn't flip anything that deals damage to him off the Confidant, Josh could get punked out of this game. So this is kind of close.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that Josh didn't just put one of those. Oh, and he just drew
more blockers.
More blockers.
Well, let's see. This is Brian's chance.
This is Dark Confidant. What do we got? Oh, it's just a second Lightning Bolt.
Oh, wow. Well,
he's not even going to show him the one that was in his hand. He's just going to play the one that revealed off of Bob. Yeah, wow. I wonder, so because there was another bolt on top, it didn't matter. But Josh did have the option of killing off that Dark Confidant and not taking the extra 2 damage.
Yeah, very, very close. I wonder if Josh thinks that he made a misstep there, or if maybe he had just seen so many other cards that match that he had some reason to think that Lightning Bolts wouldn't be in the deck, which you can kind of make a reasonable assessment because there's not that many good targets for Lightning Bolt. I mean, Josh's deck is all tokens, and then, the pro-red creature. And so there's not that many good targets for Lightning Bolt, and you can reasonably assume that there's probably not going to be that many.
So it looks like players are going to go back to their sideboard. Brian Huffman is going to take game 2, even it up at 1 apiece against Joshua Cho with his Jund deck against black-white tokens. Let's take a look at the sideboards and see if there's any things that we think should have happened or could potentially re-sideboard here. So Brian Huffman has a Thoughtseize, an Unravel the Aether, a Pyroclasm, an Ancient Grudge, 2 Kitchen Finks, 4 Fulminator Mage, a Painful Truths, a Shatterstorm, an Obstinate Baloth, a Knight of Souls Betrayal, and a Huntmaster of the Fells. What do you think is going to go on here?
So I think the Pyroclasm and the Knights of Souls Betrayal are definitely cards that are great against this token strategy. I think he can also bring in Huntmaster of the Fells because it's just kind of good in mid-range mirrors, and you can also make the same argument for Painful Truths. And then you can also make an argument for Kitchen Finks and Fulminator Mage. I think the Kitchen Finks is more likely to come in because Josh only has a couple manlands and also the Vault of the Archangel, and Fulminators are usually not at their best.
So it looks like Josh has 2 Duress, 3 Fulminator, a Disenchant, a Katakia, Warship, 3 Stony Silence, 2 Rest in Peace, and 2 Surgical Extraction. He did bring in those Rest in Peace. Do you think he's going to make any changes here?
I think he's just going to have the Rest in Peace. I don't think any of the other cards are going to come in.
I can totally see that. Now, both of these players seem to be very familiar with their decks. Things have been quite teched out a little bit, and if you want access to the latest tech, you can check out the StarCityGames.com newsletter. Now, this is your source for Magic the Gathering news. You can get the latest on the SCG Tour, watch the SCG Tour Match of the Week, receive exclusive deck lists and advice. You can catch up on all the event results, read an exclusive Cardboard Crack comic, and it's absolutely free to sign up. Go.starcitygames.com/newsletter.
Yeah, and the newsletter features some of the best articles from the Star City website. Patrick Chapin wrote a really sweet article about a bunch of new brews with the upcoming set in Standard. Jerry Thompson wrote a really sweet article showcasing Grixis control deck with Gario's Vengeance. And, you know, if you want to stay up on the metagame, this is a great way to do it.
So again, absolutely free. Sign up for that StarCityGames.com newsletter. Go.starcitygames.com/newsletter. It is your source for Magic the Gathering news. So it looks like our players are taking a quick bathroom break. So we're going to come back to the booth so you can see some more CVM and Andrew Boswell. And why don't we take this time to go over some Oath of the Gatewatch spoilers.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
So we've had quite a bit of action so far today. We haven't had a ton of time to go over some Oath of the Gatewatch spoilers. But I want to talk about Chandra Flamecaller. I think this is a very, very good card. It is a 6-mana Planeswalker, which means it needs to be a very, very good card.
Yeah.
However, we have some really sweet abilities. 4 red, 4 loyalty. You can +1. You get 2/3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste, and then they die at the beginning of your end step. You can 0 and discard all the cards in your hand and then draw that many cards +1, or you can -X to do X damage to each creature. These are 3 awesome abilities, and I really love them all.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's certainly not a card that you would want 4 of in your deck. It's just so expensive. But if you want one really powerful curve topper, I think this is going to be one of the more powerful things you can do at 6 mana. I mean, being able to play it and essentially attack for 6 immediately, you know, can put a lot of pressure onto a lot of decks that are trying to be defensive. The 0 ability, I think, is really interesting because a lot of people would probably look at it and think, oh, this is kind of like drawing an extra card every turn. But the thing that's unique about it is, A, it'll fuel your delve, and the other thing too is if you have lands that are dead in your hand, you just get to cash them in for fresh draws. So it's a lot more than just drawing 1 card a turn. And then the -X ability, one of the hallmarks of having a good Planeswalker is a Planeswalker that can protect itself. And even if you're behind, you may be able to play this Chandra Flamecaller and stabilize.
Yeah, as long as the creatures that are on the battlefield don't have 4 toughness or more, you'll be able to minus the Chandra and keep it around, which is really important. I do really love the 0. Actually, it's my favorite ability on this card.
Yeah.
But also the +1 is something that can just end the game if you play it on a stable board. Just over and over again, 6 damage is a lot of damage from a Planeswalker.
Yeah, I mean, imagine being up against a control deck and them trying to deal with this. I mean, it'd be so hard.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
So it looks like our players are back, so let's go ahead and jump back to the feature match area. We have Joshua Cho on Black-White Tokens against Brian Huffman on Jund.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how things play out this time. I mean, Josh will be on the play. That's going to be really good for him. It's going to take away a lot of the initiative that Brian would have if he were to start with a Thoughtseize and a Tarmogoyf and start beating Josh down. Josh is going to be able to develop his board first, and he's going to be able to get a little bit more time and breathing room to develop his board, get all of his tokens big, and, you know, kind of pick Brian apart.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this matchup plays out from the start. I have to imagine that something like Bitter Blossom is going to be a very good card against these Jund decks.
Yeah, for sure. Bitter Blossom would definitely be one of the best ways that Josh could start the game. On the other side, one of Brian's best ways to start the game would probably be Dark Confidant. So again, those cards kind of mirror each other and are kind of the pivotal things for the opening turns.
So it's like Josh is going to start out with just a tapped Godless Shrine, and Brian's going to have one of those discard cards that we talked about, Inquisition of Kozilek, off of his Blackleaf Cliffs.
Yeah, and having a discard card in a matchup like this is a pretty interesting thing. It's something that I personally go back and forth on. On the one hand, having a discard card in your deck is a little rough because as the game drags out and you get into a top deck war, it's such a bad top deck. But on the other hand, sometimes it's just your only good way to deal with certain cards. If Brian wants to answer something like Spectral Procession, Inquisition of Kozilek really is his best way to do it. He has no other good way of one-for-oneing that card outside of Maelstrom Pulse.
So it looks like Josh is going to reveal here a Path to Exile, a Lingering Souls, a Timely Reinforcements, a Bitter Blossom, a Ghost Quarter, and a Marsh Flat. So I have to imagine that unless Brian has something like Abrupt Decay, he's probably going to be taking that Bitter Blossom. And so since he's leaving it there, that probably telegraphs an Abrupt Decay in his hand.
Yeah, I agree. I think it telegraphs an Abrupt Decay or a lot of pressure and burn where he would want to use Josh's life total against him.
So Josh is going to go ahead and take his second turn here. I imagine he's going to play that Bitter Blossom. At the very least, it's going to make Brian Huffman use his Abrupt Decay, and that's going to free up his Intangible Virtues later in the game.
Yeah, and this is really a big win for Brian Huffman. Not only is he killing one of Josh's best threats in the matchup, but also having that Bitter Blossom in the graveyard does so much to pump up Brian's Tarmogoyfs.
So Brian is just shocked himself with an Overgrown Tomb, used an Abrupt Decay to take care of that Bitter Blossom and passed it back to Josh. He does have a Marsh Flats, so he is going to be able to cast his Lingering Souls and get some tokens. But if Brian happens to have something like Scavenging Ooze next turn and an extra green mana to eat this Lingering Souls, that could be real good for him.
Yeah, for sure. And if he doesn't, these Lingering Souls are going to be hard to deal with. The Jund deck isn't really set up to deal with a lot of tokens. Some decks will play cards like Olivia Voldaren, Chandra Pyromaster, cards like that that can be helpful, but generally speaking, these token strategies are really hard for the Jund deck to deal with.
So Josh has gone ahead and just cast his Lingering Souls, passed the turn back to Brian. Now it looks like he does have a Maelstrom Pulse in his hand, so he does have answers to these multiple tokens if it happens to get out of hand.
You may actually see Josh play around the Maelstrom Pulse and not actually flash his Lingering Souls back until Brian has either used removal spells on the Lingering Souls tokens that are on the table or used that Maelstrom Pulse.
Now Josh does have discard spells in his hand, which in situations like this could end up being very, very good. Looks like Brian is just going to go ahead and Inquisition Josh. He has two Path to Exiles and that Auriok Champion that we've seen that's so hard for some decks to get rid of. In fact, I don't think Brian has any way to get rid of Auriok Champion.
Yeah, this is a really good Inquisition of Kozilek. In a lot of ways, this matchup plays like a traditional mid-range mirror where you don't want your discard spells, but in this case, the discard spells are the only way to deal with some of Josh's threats. So Brian's really hitting things exactly the way he wants to.
I wonder if Josh brought in Warship since Brian just doesn't have any way to answer an Auriok Champion.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a great point.
So it looks like he's just going to take that Auriok Champion and pass it back to Josh Cho. And it looks like, unfortunately, the boss has missed one of his matches.
Oh, no.
Harlan Fear was able to take his match 2-0 against Cody Minix on Abzan.
Wow, well, good for him. I think those sideboard cards that make his deck a little bit more mid-rangey than a lot of other twin decks are really paying off.
Yeah, and there's a lot of mid-rangey decks in this top 8, so that's definitely going to help him out.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if Josh Cho wins this match, he's going to have to play him again, and we all know how that went last time.
Yes, we did. Well, I mean, at least it'll be a rematch, and someone's maybe will be able to enact revenge, which is always sweet.
So it looks like Josh is just going to flash back his Lingering Souls. He's going to go ahead and attack with the two tokens that are able to attack and just pass the turn back to Brian. Now Brian is going to use his Bloodstained Mire to go ahead and get another land out of his deck. And let's see what he decides to do on his turn. He does have that Maelstrom Pulse, and it looks like a 4-for-1, but it's really just a 1-for-1.
Yeah, for sure. And things are lining up a lot better than they usually do on Brian's side. Typically, you know, you've heard me say time and time again that these Jund decks usually have a hard time answering a token strategy, but Brian is doing really, really well. His removal is lining up just the way he wants it to.
So he does have that Maelstrom Pulse. Looks like he's going to use it. Now Josh might just Path to Exile his own token here.
Yeah, it seems like a really, really great play.
Plus, that's going to put him up to 4 mana, which is what he didn't have before. So if he draws something like Sorin Solemn Visitor or Gideon Ally of Zendikar, here he can just slam it on the table and go to town.
Yeah, and you saw Brian kind of slam his fist on the table. I think he might have forgotten about that Path to Exile, or maybe not forgot about it, but just wasn't thinking of that line of play because he knew the Path to Exiles were there, and if he was thinking about it, I don't think he would have actually cast that Maelstrom Pulse.
Yeah, so it looks like Josh is just going to find a basic swamp out of his deck. Brian's going to go ahead and cut his deck once he's done shuffling. And from the hand actions, it looks like Brian is maybe a little frustrated with himself, not realizing that line of play.
Yeah. I mean, these tournaments are so long. They're so grueling.
Oh, yeah.
They're absolutely exhausting. anyone who tells you that they went through the whole day without making a mistake, they're just kidding themselves, basically. It happens to everyone occasionally.
I agree. So Josh has gone ahead and drawn for his turn. He's going to attack for 3 with his Lingering Soul tokens, and he's going to play out an Auriok Champion that he just drew off the top.
A really, really good top deck. And Josh's board is going to be really hard for Brian to deal with. Brian really wanted to have something like a Tarmogoyf for some other pressure earlier on, but he's just had a stream of answers, and he hasn't really had any card advantage to go with it either. So he's been doing a good job interacting, but without a source of card advantage or pressure, he's just treading water, and Josh is starting to get ahead.
So there's an Inquisition, another Inquisition from Brian. Going to take a land from Josh's hand. Brian, it does look like he has a Pia and Kieran Nalar in his hand, which could be really, really good at trying to shore this game up.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the cards in Brian's deck that is equipped more than most to deal with these black-white token strategies, because it essentially is a token card on its own. So if Brian can hit his 4th land drop, that's certainly a card he'll be looking to play.
So Josh is just going to go ahead and attack with his creatures here. Looks like Brian is thinking about whether or not he wants to use an Abrupt Decay on one of those Lingering Soul tokens. He decides not to. And Josh is just going to pass back. Brian really needs to find an untapped land so he can cast that Pia and Kieran, and he doesn't, but he just goes with a Kitchen Finks instead.
So at least this Kitchen Finks will be able to hold the champion at bay. But last turn when we saw Brian debating casting an Abrupt Decay on just a single Lingering Souls token really highlights how Brian is just not actually equipped to control what Josh is doing.
Yeah, I feel like if Josh happens to draw another Lingering Souls or maybe something like Spectral Procession, it might just put this game a little too far out of reach.
Yeah, well, I mean, even just as it is, Josh is just ahead. He's able to attack Brian. Josh is also way ahead on life. And Brian doesn't really have that great of attacks either. I mean, he can attack, but he's so behind on the race, it doesn't really get him anywhere.
Yeah, and even if he were to try to build his board a little more, he's just going to be negating some of the attacks that he makes with that Auriok Champion being on the battlefield. And any token generator that Josh happens to draw is just going to solidify his board and even give him more life. It just makes the racing much harder.
Yeah, and flying is such a good ability.
It looks like Josh drew a Thoughtseize, which is going to take that Pia and Kieran Nalar.
And I think that's the Huntmaster of the spells that's all blacked out.
Yeah. So that is going to be rough.
Yeah. Flying is so good in a matchup like this. When everything is ground creatures, having a few creatures with flying is such a big asset, simply because if you do get into a board stall, it lets you continue attacking. And if you're in any kind of racing scenario, you can guarantee that some of your attackers will get through because they're flying, but you'll always be able to block your opponent's stuff on the ground.
Yeah, I have to imagine that Josh is going to take that Pia and Kieran Nalar, but he is going to take his time figuring it out and writing down all the cards.
Yeah, given the nature of this matchup, I think Brian really wished that he had a bit more aggressive potential in this matchup. But as things played out, he just drew all of his answers and none of his threats until it was too late.
So it looks like he did decide to take that Pia and Kieran. He's going to attack in for 3 with his Lingering Souls. And at this point, if both players draw absolutely nothing, Josh just has it in 3 more attacks.
Yeah, Brian might be able to draw another Kitchen Finks. That'll buy him a little bit more time. He can cast this Huntmaster of the Fells to gain 2 life. The Huntmaster of the Fells, if he gets a chance to flip, it might even be able to whittle down some of these Lingering Souls, which would be the ideal scenario.
So the Huntmaster is going to bring a wolf along with it, which is going to gain Joshua Cho 2 life, and then he's going to take 3 on the attack from the Kitchen Finks.
Yeah, we'll see if Josh has an answer for this Huntmaster of the Fells. He may have another Path to Exile at some point. That would be a good way to deal with it. At the very least, Josh is going to be trying to cast 1 spell every turn so the Huntmaster doesn't flip. And cards like Lingering Souls are particularly good for that because it's 1 spell on 2 different turns.
Oh, and it looks like he just drew an Intangible Virtue.
Wow, well that's really great.
Which is a very good draw here. So he's going to be able to attack for 6, put Brian down to 1. He does have a Path to Exile, so he's just going to pass the turn and see what Brian does. I imagine if Brian just tries to pass the turn without casting anything, we might see a Path to Exile on that Huntmaster in his end step. But either way, all 3 of those soul tokens are lethal. And without another Maelstrom Pulse, Brian is just going to be dead on the next attack.
Yeah, not a whole lot that Brian could do. I mean, he just didn't have any pressure going on, and Josh is just favored in these long, protracted games because the tokens are so hard for Brian to deal with.
Yeah, just getting 2 and 3 and 4 threats out of one single card. There's just too much for an attrition one-for-one deck like John can handle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if Brian had some of the other haymakers that Junt has access to, like Chandra or Olivia, he could just sort of machine gun things down. Or even I've seen some people play Bonfire of the Damned, which can be really exciting. But in this particular case, Brian doesn't have those cards. He's probably chosen other cards because they're more relevant in the metagame, because this black-white tokens deck isn't really one of the big players.
So it looks like Josh is going to let that Huntmaster flip and kill one of his tokens. He is going to cast another Intangible Virtue off the top of his deck. And it looks like
wow,
Brian's going to have answers for both of those tokens.
So Josh is kind of getting punished for letting that Huntmaster flip.
Yeah, now it's going to flip back because 2 spells were played.
Is there any chance that Josh has a different card in his hand?
It might not be a Path to Exile, but I thought that it was. I thought he had 2 Path to Exile. So that Huntmaster is going to flip back, give him another wolf that's going to gain Josh another life.
Yeah, so this is quite the turn of events. This is exactly what Brian needed. This Huntmaster of the Fells is gaining him life, buying him more time, developing his board some more, and the fact that when the first time it flips, it is able to deal 2 damage to something has really helped him control what Josh has done.
So now Brian does have that Bloodstained Mire off to the side, but he can use that to activate his Raging Ravine if he just wanted to start attacking with some of his creatures.
Yeah, I believe Josh actually has a Ghost Quarter.
So there really is no value in activating the Raging Ravine.
Yeah, he may not want to do that.
But it's tapped.
But the Ghost Quarter is tapped for sure.
I have to imagine that Josh thought the game was just over there that turn.
Yeah, this is quite the turnaround of events. I mean, I really thought that Josh also had the Path to Exile, so I did not see this coming.
So it looks like Brian is going to go ahead and use that Bloodstained Mire. Hopefully he grabs a basic land so he doesn't just die.
Yeah. That would be quite the anticlimactic finale.
Yeah, so it's like we're just going to get a swamp. I imagine we're going to see this Raging Ravine get fired up. Not only is this going to put some pressure on Josh with the attackers, but it's also going to let that Huntmaster flip again.
Yeah, it doesn't look like Brian's going to cast any spells. If Josh hasn't cast any on the previous turns, I don't think he's got one for this turn either.
Yeah, so it looks like one of those wolves cannot attack. He's not going to fire up the Raging Ravine. We're going to see Josh is going to block the Huntmaster of the Fells with the Auric Champion. He's going to take 5 damage from the other attackers.
And the champion has protection from red, so it's all fine.
Yeah, I wonder why he didn't attack with his Raging Ravine.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
So we do have the Huntmaster is going to flip. It's going to do 2 damage to Josh Cho. Will not be able to do 2 damage to the Auric Champion because it does have protection from red.
So Josh really needs something like a Lingering Souls here, something that'll be multiple blockers and multiple attackers.
So it looks like Josh has a Plains and a white card in his hand that turns out to be an Auric Champion. So it looks like he did not have a Path to Exile. So there wasn't something that we missed or that Josh missed. He just didn't have the card that we thought he had.
So really rough for Josh. I mean, he was in such a good position. I guess the one thing that we can kind of take note, though, is Lingering Souls, while it was multiple attackers and it required multiple removal spells, despite the Lingering Souls being only 1 card, the fact that these Intangible Virtues don't really do anything without Lingering Souls tokens kind of leads to a certain level of parity between the 1-for-1 removal spells on those tokens.
So it looks like we're going to see the Raging Ravine get activated now, which really isn't going to do much since there is a Ghost Quarter that's there available. And we're going to see the Ghost Quarter get used. Josh is going to be able to make a couple blocks, but it looks like he is just dead on this attack.
Yeah, the fact that the Huntmaster of the Fells, who's now the Ravager of the Fells, has Trample is super relevant because he's going to be able to trample over for a bunch of damage, and it doesn't look like Josh has any blocks that will allow him to live. So if Brian doesn't specifically assign the trample damage onto Josh, that'll mean that Josh only takes 4 damage from the 2 wolves.
That is correct. I wonder what they are discussing.
Seems to be some sort of discrepancy of the life totals. I believe if Brian just has the trample damage pass over, that it will... 1 of it has to go on to the creature, and then the rest of it can go on to Josh. So that would kill Josh, but we'll see where things are at with the players.
Okay, so it could be that Brian, if Brian just said take 4, then Josh is going to live through this attack.
And it kind of looks like he's living through this attack.
Now, when you do have creatures with trample, you do have to assign the damage. So if you don't say anything, the default is that all of the damage will go to the creature.
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. One thing that's unfortunate is I believe Josh has a hand, so Lingering Souls is still a top deck, but it looks like Josh is not going to get what he needs and lose this match anyway.
Yeah, so it looks like Brian is going to take it over Josh Cho. So Jund is going to be victorious, and the boss is going to be 2 for 2 on his picks.
Yeah, I mean, with these players, they're all so great. I guess it just comes down to the fact that the deck choice doesn't matter a whole lot. They're all just great players and in a great field. You know, your win ratio is always going to be around 50-50.
So it looks like our top 4 is going to be Bob Huang on on his Goryo's Vengeance deck against Bradley Carpenter on Abzan.